I recently had some interesting interactions with some furries, and the story is wild. So, buckle up. I wrote a whole list of everything I wanted to talk about so that I don't forget it all because there's so much. So, sorry about the camera quality using my laptop because my phone camera sucks worse. Um, And sorry that I'm not looking in the camera. I'm looking at myself. Okay. First things first. How did I meet these furries? So, the 21 Pilots concert was on Tuesday. And me and my group of friends were planning on lining up on Sunday. And we were like 90% positive that we were going to be the first people in line. Because 21 Pilots fans are crazy and they love to line up like days and days early, but not really in Nebraska. Like, that shit just doesn't fly. So we were pretty sure we were going to be the first people in line. So these furries showed up on Tuesday, a week before the concert, which is like insane to me, but they claimed that they thought that that was just how it was going to be. Like, that's how long the line was going to be. So, yeah. So I was in contact with them on Twitter. I was DMing them on Twitter, trying to make sure that they were being safe, like nobody was going to get hurt, and that they were going to be the respectful, like, leaders of the line. So I was basically just telling them, like, hey, there's a home Huskers game on Saturday, like, I wouldn't recommend being like out and around downtown during that time because it's gonna get crazy and like all this stuff. So I ended up inviting them to come spend a couple hours in my room on Saturday while the game was going on so that they weren't just like out, because it was also snowing and I felt bad for them. So I invited them up to my room to just, like, sit for a while because I wasn't doing anything. Mom was at work, like, yeah. So they came up. Initial first thoughts, they smelled awful. They smelled like two guys who were living in a van and hadn't showered in a month. And that's probably, like, realistically what it was, but it smelled awful. Awful. Also, they asked if they could bring their service dog up, and I was like, yeah, of course. So they brought their service dog with, and my first impression of him is that he was so skinny, and he was definitely not a trained service animal. So that's that. So the first thing on my bulleted list to discuss is the dog. His name was Max. He was a German Shepherd, 3 years old. He was all black. He was a really sweet dog. Like, I am a dog person. I loved getting to hang out with this dog. So a couple things. First of all, he was not trained at all. No way. There's no way that he was a trained service dog. He did not know how to behave on a leash. He kept like tugging at it and trying to run away, and that is not how a service animal acts on a leash. Like, that's just a fact. Service animals know leash manners. He also was barking at everything. Like, they brought him into the lobby and he just was barking at people, and that's also like not something that a service dog should be doing. So I talked to them a little bit about it, and they said that one of them was a dog trainer in the past, and so he was working on training him. And, you know, I didn't say anything because I'm like generally a nice person, but I was kind of just in my head like, you can't parade this dog around as a service dog and wear the service vest if it isn't trained. So that is one thing that rubbed me the wrong way. Another thing, they were neglecting this dog. He was so skinny. It's like really, it was disturbing. Like, you could count his ribs, you could see his hips. Like, he was so skinny. It was just sad. Another thing, once we were actually outside camped up for the concert, like a couple days later, they brought the dog out to pee. Keep in mind, the dog is living in their van with them. They live in a van, and the dog lives in the van. A full-grown German Shepherd lives in their van. They brought him out to pee, and this is gross, but pee is supposed to come out in a stream, and his was coming out in like little tiny spurts. Like, he couldn't pee. And that is a sign of neglect, and also just sad. So, yeah. Another thing, I overheard them talking about rationing their food, and that's really sad. Like, you have to ration your dog's food. You shouldn't have a dog if you aren't able to feed it a proper amount of food every day. So, this is when I first heard about Sarah. So, Sarah is apparently someone who lives in Ohio who they live with sometimes. So, Sarah first came into play when they said that once they got back to Sarah's, they would have plenty of dog food and they wouldn't have to worry about rationing it anymore. So I was like, okay, good. They have somewhere where they can stay, that they have dog food. This was not the end of Sarah's appearance. They then told me that the reason that he barks so much is because he has scars on his ears from getting in a fight with Sarah's dog. You should not be living somewhere where your two dogs are going to get in fights, where one of them is going to get so injured that he screams every time he touches his ears. Like, that isn't responsible. And if you are homeless and living in a van, like, getting that shelter should be the priority over keeping this dog. I mean, that's just how I see it. The other thing that they told me, that I think they were just trying to prove like how well trained he was when they told me this, but it just was completely disturbing to me. They said that one time they left him with their roommates, which I'm assuming means Sarah and whoever else lives there, and that the roommates did not take the dog out to the bathroom for 3 days, and he did not pee inside. That's not healthy. Like, they were bragging about it as if that's something to be proud of, but that is not good. It's not healthy that your dog can hold his pee in for 3 days. That's really bad. Like, that's not something to be proud of him for. Like, that is fucked up. Yeah. That's pretty much all I have to say about the dog. So, moving on to my next bullet point, which was the orphan situation. So one of them had mentioned to me that he had a Pell Grant for being an orphan and being in the foster care system. And I was like, okay, that kind of makes sense, because a lot of kids that are in the foster care system end up aging out and becoming homeless. And I believe they were both 20 years old. So it kind of makes sense that that's just how it worked out. But then he started telling me that his mom worked at the biggest venue in St. Louis, which they had told everyone that they were from St. Louis. So he was telling me that he said, I don't usually tell people this because they don't believe me, but I've met most of like the big members in like the rock scene, and he was saying that he's met the members of Fall Out Boy, the members of Panic at the Disco, he met all the members of My Chemical Romance. He said that he's met 21 Pilots before, but he also later ended up telling us that this was his first 21 Pilots show, so that is an inconsistency in their story. And it just didn't make sense to me, because those are bands that like, okay, so like Fall Out Boy, Panic, and My Chem, those were bands that like if he lived with his mom when he was really little and then ended up being put into like foster care later in life, like those bands make sense that he could have met them. But 21 Pilots, he said that his mom worked at like one of the biggest venues in St. Louis. So they didn't start playing like big venues until the last like 2 tours that they've done. So it would have been 3 years ago max, and at that point they would have been 17, and that's like, it just doesn't make sense that they claim to be an orphan, but then like this receipts that they were with their mother at age 17 because their mother introduced them to 21 Pilots. Like, that, none of that made sense to me. Like, that just seems like one of the things is a lie. I don't know. They also, like, he told me something about his brother at one point. I don't remember what he said, but I remember thinking that's interesting that he keeps talking about his family, but then, like, told me he was an orphan. And I know that, like, sometimes that, you know, orphans, like, know their families really well or blah, 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 or whatever, but still, that just seemed off. Like, something is not right here. The next thing I want to talk about is their financial situation. So they are homeless, they live in their van, and one of, like, the first things that I was curious about is how are they making money to be able to put gas in this van and travel to follow these, like, tours and see all these concerts? Like, where are they getting this money from? So when I was talking to them, they told me that they perform on the street for money, which is like, okay, that seems realistic, I guess. But it just, I don't know, something about it is weird to me, because performing on the street, like, yeah, you could make, like, enough money to put gas in the van, sure, but, like, these 21 Pilots tickets were, like, $70 a ticket for GA when they first went on sale. So that's, like, $150 plus Ticketmaster fees. We'll just round up to, like, $180 just for these 2 tickets. But they also had a third ticket that they ended up selling the day before. So that's, like, that's just, like, so much money that I know there's no way that that came from, like, performing on the street. Yeah, so just a couple things, like, where did they get this big ass van if they don't have any money? Like, it was a nice, like, pretty nice. How do they afford to put gas in it? Like, those things eat up gas like no joke. How were they affording to travel across the country? Like, they were telling me that they had been to LA, they'd been to New York, like, all these different places, and it just, how can you afford to do that if you're homeless and living in a van and have no source of income? They also are on food stamps, and that might seem rational to some people unless you actually know a little bit about food stamps, and, like, it's really, really difficult to get on food stamps. In their case, you have to be working 20 hours a week to be eligible for food stamps. And there are some, like, other circumstances, but, like, you have to be working 20 hours a week. That's just incorrect. Like, something about that doesn't add up. They also like, bought a bunch of, like, chips for everyone who was in line for the concert. And I overheard them say that they spent half of their food stamps on these chips. And, like, that's just plain up stupid. Like, that is being stupid. So, yeah, that didn't add up to me. Let's see, what else? Oh, when they were in my room, they were talking about, like, oh, we don't want to go back to the parking garage yet because we can't afford to pay the parking. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. And I just kind of, like, overheard them talking to each other. And one of them said to the other, like, okay, we can just wait till you get paid on Friday. So they have a job, but I don't know where. And I don't know how they're getting paid because they've been traveling. And that, I mean, that just doesn't, it doesn't make sense to me. I don't get it. Like, their lies, I'm going to say they're lies because to me this is all, like, a web of lies. They're, like, overlapping, and there are just inconsistencies in everything. So, oh, the other thing, they smoke weed. They were asking me about the weed laws in Nebraska. How can you afford weed but you can't afford to feed your dog? And the other thing, they were both transgender, and one of them was tweeting about his tee shots. And those are expensive. Expensive, like really expensive. And so that's just another like expense that I don't know where they're getting the money from. Okay. The last thing that I'm questioning about them is their actual homelessness. I do not believe that they are actually homeless. It just doesn't add up. The first thing, one of them was telling me that his mom pays his phone bill. Why don't you just go live with your mother if she wants to pay your phone bill? Like, I don't get that. Like when they talked about their mom, like, it just didn't make sense. I don't know. The other thing is their friend Sarah. So they kept talking about how they were going to go back to Ohio to live with Sarah. Like, if you are living in Sarah's house, you're not homeless. Like, you have a home. So you're not homeless. Okay, another thing. They kept telling everyone that they were from St. Louis, but they had Illinois plates on their van, and their home is in Ohio. I don't get it. They never said anything about Illinois, so I don't know where those license plates came from. Like, that's just one thing that really, I wish I understood how that logic came into play. I don't know. And okay, and final thing I have to say, I don't want to say they were bragging, but they were like rubbing it in people's faces that they were homeless. Like, my group of friends was in line, like right behind them, and so we heard them talking. Like, whenever they were talking to new people joining the line or just like talking to their friends or whatever, like, we could hear their conversations. Every single person that came up to them, they were like, haha, yeah, we're homeless. Like, that just makes me uncomfortable. Like, I don't understand why you would want to, like, share that information or, like, rub that in people's faces. Like, I don't get it. I don't know. But, yeah. That's, like, all of the weird stuff that just doesn't make sense to me. Now I'll just tell you about how literally just weird they were. So, furries. Yeah. I don't have a problem with furries, really. Like, I don't understand it, but I think that, people can do what they want as long as it's not hurting anyone. Like, if you want to dress up like a wolf and you feel like a wolf, like, good for you. Furry suits are really expensive. How did they afford that? Because he did have one. Only one of them was a furry, but we've been referring to them as the furries, so sorry. But he does have a fursuit, and those things are expensive. He also, they were like very into like sharing intimate details of their lives with everyone around them. So when they were in my room, like one of them left to go like take the dog out to pee or something like that. I don't remember. And the other one, who is the furry, was telling me about it, and he's like, I'm really surprised that like everyone's been so accepting of me being a furry so far. And I was like, oh yeah, I think that people don't really care, blah blah blah, and I was just trying to be nice. But he told me, yeah, I'm not gonna lie and say that I don't like to do the fetishy stuff, because I do, but not everyone does. And like, why would you tell me? I just met you half an hour ago. Why would you tell me that you want to have sex in your furry suit? I didn't ask. I didn't want or need to know that. Like, I just don't get it. And yeah. Yeah. So that's the interaction that I had with the furries. The smell of their BO stayed in our room for like 3 days after they left. It was not good. Yeah, everything about them made me uncomfortable, and I was trying so hard to like be nice and polite to them. Yeah. Now they follow me on Twitter and we're like friends, so we're still like in a group chat together, and I don't want to leave the group chat, but I wish they weren't in it. Yeah. So that's how my week was.